Jai Hind and welcome to Dev Talks. Multilateralism and collective security of nations, especially India, is something which has been discussed after the visit of the president of Russia, Vladimir Putin, to India. A lot of people are asking this question: how is India managing both heavyweights on one side, the United States of America, and on the other side, the Russians as well? That is a clear example of multilateralism. To discuss this topic a little further, I have with me after a long time Air Marshal Anil Khosla, a former Vice Chief of the Indian Air Force, as an analyst of global security affairs, a commentator, a writer, and of course, someone I've had multiple conversations with on various different subjects. Thank you, sir, for joining me to discuss this very interesting and very wide-ranging topic.
Thanks, Aadi. Can you hear me? Yeah. So it's always a pleasure interacting with you, and we've done quite a few videos on very interesting subjects, and this is another very live and interesting subject, that is multilateralism, or more appropriate word would be collective security, which is the flavor of the day as far as the world is concerned, and what is India's status on this count, and whether we should jump into it or not jump into it, or what is the past, future recommendations. All these aspects, I think, are worth deliberating upon.
Certainly, yes, sir. And as a matter of fact, India is trying to assert its position in the world. And, one of the things that we see is India has to maintain relationships on both sides of the paradigm. So to begin with, what is your perspective on multilateralism and security cooperation? Just to give us basically an overview of the subject and the current situation that India finds itself in.
Yeah, very, very valid starting point. So if you have to define multilateralism, it would be, like you start with unilateral is, one country taking action. Bilateral is two countries or two states. And multilateral could be defined as three or more states with a common goal and, trying to have a cooperation with each other to solve a common problem. So I call it collective problem solving. But this definition is very, very simplistic definition. But if you now go into the characteristics of multilateralism, then it becomes even more clearer what is this term multilateralism. So one of the things is, as I said, you have to have a common goal or a purpose. That's very essential. For example, I'll give you, Quad is the discussion issue at the moment. And Quad is not a new thing. This is Quad 2. Quad 1 was a long time back. It was initiated, but it was stillborn. It is considered to be stillborn baby. Why? Because, there was no common goal as such. So purpose was not there, common purpose. So Quad 2 may succeed because it has some common goal as such. This is just one of the example I'm saying. The second characteristic is a lot of interdependency between the states who are the members of this multilateral cooperation or agreement or whatever you want to call it. And third characteristic is the members who are part of the group, they make the rules and then they abide by the rules. So basically, if you say the engagement between the states and the nations in a multilateral group would be consultative, inclusive, showing solidarity to each other. And one other important aspect is equality. There is equality in this thing. It's not whether a big nation or a small nation and all, but this is theory. But actual what happens is slightly different. And when I say equality, also it involves same rights and same amount of obligations. So these are the basically characteristics of a multilateral engagement. So when you see the characteristics, it becomes slightly clearer. Then another aspect is, multilateralism, multilateral groups could be two types. One is global and one is regional. And, global, obviously, as the word suggests, entire world, most of the countries involved in it. And regional could be, continent-wise or a particular area-wise or group-wise, looking at the regional issues. So these are the two types of multilateral engagement. And it will be worthwhile, Adi, to go into a little bit of historical perspective on multilateralism. So now what we are seeing now is a modern multilateralism. The multilateralism, the modern multilateralism which evolved now, its genesis lies in the pre-World War. Like World War One, the League of Nations came, and after post World War Two, the United Nations came, and these are global level multilateral groups. So the main aim at that time was to prevent any such large scale wars, which it succeeded in all these years. And but what has happened is it has evolved into many different directions, and now number of groupings have come up. You hear of IMF, WTO, WHO, etc. And along with this, military alliances like NATO and all flourished. So basically, what I'm getting at is not only the security issues. It gone into economy. It gone into trade. It has gone into handling various facets of statecraft, or I would say interstate engagement. So it is not only related to security. That is what is multilateralism about. Now coming to these groupings, or whether you want to call it groups or engagements and all. So words, what strike your mind is MOU, Memorandum of Understanding, agreement, alliance, strategic partnership, assistance, treaty, accord. So these are the words which are each has got its own connotation, and each has got its own meaning. Now I don't want to go into semantics, and I don't want to go into discussing each key what is the connotation, because it's very very flexible, and this thing, but these are the words. Now second thing you asked me about was, one was the multilateralism. The second part is, in multilateralism, as I said, dime this thing, method of statecraft, that is your diplomatic, information, military, economy. So security wise, security wise, I call it collective security agreement or arrangement, or whatever you want to call it in a broad term. So what is collective security arrangement? It's a basically joint action by members against one aggressor. Okay, so you have a member of groups who are party to it, and you take a joint action against any aggressor who commits aggression on any of the member states. So it's got a very inclusive membership, and the target is not named. It's a potential aggressor. It could be one of the members itself. It's not necessarily that it could be external. It could be one of the members itself. So it is second thing is not restricted to, I'm talking about now security cooperation. It is not restricted to defense or military, because it could be energy security, it could be water security, it could be cyber security, it could be space security, it could be trade security. So it includes all the domains. Okay, and it includes components of, or combinations of, all the national power and the statecraft. Okay, as a subset to security cooperation or security agreement, there is security assistance. Okay, but security assistance is one grade or one shade lower than the security cooperation or agreement. It involves basically, things like training, education, help in capability building and enhancement. Not direct support, but helping the other country in building up. Like our policy in Afghanistan is a classic example of security assistance, where you are assisting the country in developing enhancing their capabilities. Okay, so these are the various aspects related to military multilateralism, and going into security domain, not touching the military part of it. Yeah, Aadi.
It's a wide-ranging subject, and I think one thing that I kind of gain from what you're saying is that a lot of these cooperations are based on mutual or individual interests of the nations. It's not written in stone in terms of the agreements between two nations here or two nations anywhere else. The names might be similar, but the whole terms and the settings of these cooperation or agreements would be totally unique to their own particular purpose. Having said that, sir, there is also one of the biggest things that we see today are two major topics in terms of military alliance, which the latest one that we can see is the AUKUS. And we also have something known as military cooperation. You could, I mean, to my understanding, you could put Quad into a category like that. How would you kind of, explain this particular, these two terms, and what is the relevance today, sir?
So, a very valid observation you made and very valid question you raised. So, observation which you raised was that it is not a written in stone. You're very right. So the word coming in is flexible security cooperation, which we'll talk about sometime later. So it has become very very flexible in nature. And what are the connotations of flexible? We'll talk about later. But asking about military cooperation and military alliance, very very valid question. And also linked to it is also defense diplomacy. So I'll just spend one minute on these three aspects. So military cooperation. So it is you can say, subset of multilateralism. The security cooperation is a subset of multilateralism, and military cooperation could be subset of security cooperation. So it is basically all integration. That means all actions which you take between the two states or multiple states for interacting with the other countries' defense or military establishments. That could come under military cooperation. Okay, aim would be to build and promote military relationship between the countries. Joint capability enhancement could be the second aim. And third could be, in peace as well as wartime, the members give access to their military facilities to the other. Like China has got a string of pearl, you have heard. So they made bases and they made alliances so that they can get security. Similarly, we have gone with some agreements with the USA now. So basically, logistic support, and so these are the examples. So in peace as well as in war, when you're operating, you could be making use of the logistics and other support facilities from the member countries. Now, like we had security cooperation, security assistance, similarly, the military cooperation and military assistance. So military assistance is again one grade lower than the military cooperation. It involves, education, training, lease of equipment, and it could be exercised by, various conducting exercises, exchanges, MOU treaties, and sharing. That is defense diplomacy also, you could carry out like this. I'll talk about it later. Now, this is military cooperation. Now, military alliance. Okay, you gave an example of Quad. Okay, now Quad, India's stand at the moment is that it's not a military alliance as such. Like military alliance would be like NATO, So Quad, they're saying it, but we have to keep our minds open. This thing, whereas the other member countries are pressing into that we should have a sort of a military alliance. Okay, so how could you define as military alliance? Firstly, military alliances are as old as the war itself. Okay, it's not a new thing. In olden days, also, always enemy is a friend. So that concept was always there. So how do you define military alliances? This is a formal agreement between two or more states. Okay, and that involves a mutual support in case of war. That means direct support. Okay, it is also an agreement to render military support against external threat under predetermined conditions. So these are the two sort of broad definitions which cover this. So, like for example, now world over, and especially China's belligerent attitude, a lot of countries have come across together with sort of a military alliance. Okay. Then second example is Taiwan and USA. Like USA is Taiwan is a protectorate of USA. So you could say it's a sort of a military alliance where direct military support could be provided in case of aggression. Okay, why do we go into military alliances? There could be 2-3 reasons. One is the shared values and ideas. This, to my mind, in the modern these days, is I think lesser of a reason. The more important reason is saving of money, cost, and military benefits. Because if you have military alliance, you can reduce your military expenditure and collective security comes into it. Like example is Nordic states. Nordic states like Sweden and Norway and all, they've reduced the military by going in for joint patrolling and joint use of military. That is a classic example of this. Third and most important reason why people go into alliances is protection provided by the stronger ally. That's why people go in alliance with the USA. It's like Big Brother is watching your back. That sort of a concept. And I gave an example of US and Taiwan. That is a classic example. So these could be the 3 reasons why military alliances go in. Okay, Aadi, you'll be surprised. There are about 50 to 60 military alliances existing in the world. Okay, this could be continent-wise about 5 to 10%, globally another 10%. Regional level are very high, 10 to about 50%. And they are intercontinental also about 50 to 60. But if you add up these figures, they'll not add up to 100% because obvious reasons, some of them are common to various categories.
Sure.
So these are sort of military alliances. But India doesn't have military alliance with anyone. That's another interesting observation. We'll talk about India maybe sometime later. Okay, now as I said, the third aspect is defense diplomacy. I want to cover defense diplomacy is because defense diplomacy has got a very, very active role in today's fair and today's situation which we are in. So, what is defense diplomacy? It's actually an oxymoron. It's a peaceful use of military in the realm of diplomacy to achieve national aims and objectives. Now, military is a instrument of aggression, but you are using it for peaceful way. That means it's like hard power being used as a soft power. So that is the oxymoron part of it. Okay, now how do you exercise defense diplomacy? As I mentioned slightly earlier, you have military relations and cooperation with the member countries. You have exchanges and visits of various teams and various dignitaries. Then you carry out exercises, maybe multilateral exercises, service exercises. Then you carry out HADR activities. Okay, and all these things are carried out. So it also improves the interoperability between the militaries of different countries. Then you have defense capability building in terms of training, education, infrastructure development. Then you have direct defense capability enhancement in terms of transfer of technology, equipment sale, and lease or gift. Okay, we also gifted few things to our neighbors at times. Examples are Sri Lanka, examples are Afghanistan.
Myanmar.
So these are Myanmar. So these are the examples of giving gift or lease. Okay, then you have defense attaches in the embassy for defense diplomacy and other reasons. Then you have MOUs, treaties, and agreements with the members related to aid sharing, information sharing, logistic support, okay, anti-piracy, UN peacekeeping. All these are, tools of defense diplomacy. Then, most important is very active is strategic coercion, which we saw in Doklam, we saw in Ladakh, the South China Sea, you're seeing every day. The posturing which is carried out, posturing, muscle flexing, I call it. Okay, and also it's a sort of signaling that if you do this, I'm ready to go up the escalation ladder. So these are the various tools, or you can say by ways in which defense diplomacy can be utilized in signaling or for whatever national aims and objectives. So these are the perspective of these terms and terminologies related to multilateralism, related to security cooperation, related to military cooperation, and related to defense diplomacy. Yeah, Aadi.
Interesting. So one can see actually when you're talking about it, and there are examples that keep popping into your head, and when you realize that this is happening here, and this is happening here, and this is happening here, and this is happening here. The big brother is obviously the Americans in this whole game, and Russians to a large extent in the Central Asian region, where they exercise a lot of control in terms of security related matters. So looking at the trends these days, every country is, or in a region, let me rephrase the question. In every region, we've got this one country which has issues with its neighbors, and it's not something that we can see only in the Indian subcontinent. We see it in Europe, we see it in North Africa, we see huge issues happening within Africa as well. We have issues within South America, we have issues in, in towards the South China Sea, where it's a plethora of, it's a whole another debate over there. What do you see as the trend setting up these days with regards to countries trying to develop something like this?
Yeah. So what is happening is, Aadi very rightly said, and I mentioned earlier also that this whole process has evolved from World War and the formation of multilateral organizations. It has evolved into different. So what are the current trends? Okay. So let me cover the current trends which are happening in multilateralism or cooperation, security cooperation. So as far as multilateralism is concerned, one of the trends which we have seen is the figures, if you remember, which I flashed, 40 to 50% were regional, if you remember.
Mm.
So the trend is at the moment the multilateralism is shifting to regional multilateralism. That means from global to uh, regional. The reason is very straightforward. If you have a global level engagement or groups, so most of the countries in that group are not related to that problem, which is a regional problem.
Localized
But
problem.
if you have a regional group, all the members are facing that problem. So that is why it is shifting towards a regional sort of engagement. So that is one. And second is multilateralism, that is global level, has come under like UN. Role of UN is discussed many times. What is the efficacy of it at the moment? Is it relevant now or not relevant? There are only three views. One is an optimistic view, which says that it has served its purpose and it's still relevant. Then there's a pessimistic view that it served its purpose earlier, but nowadays it's not relevant anymore, or it's not evolved, it's not changed with the world. And third view is transformational view, which people feel that yes, it served its purpose and it is changing and it is evolving and it is keeping in step with the changes which are taking place. Although some criticism comes in that the speed or the rapidity of change is not keeping up with the environment. It needs to do much more, it needs to change much more. So these are the three views which are this thing. But there are a lot of challenges also related to this multilateralism. One is the world order is changing. The fragmentation is taking place. A bit earlier there was two blocks. Now there are many blocks, or the whole process is evolving. The world order. Then some of the countries are becoming too belligerent, like China, tending to dominate or coerce others. Okay, third is funding issues. I mentioned earlier, it's not so easy that equal rights and equal obligations. So what happens practically is countries which are rich like USA or China, who are contributing more than the others, they demand more than the others. They're saying, okay, we are obliging more, so we need to have more say in the sales. That is what practically happens. Whereas the engagement principle is that equal obligations and equal rights. So these are various challenges. Now, as I said, the trend is for the regional multilateralism gaining acceptance rather than global. Then, second is it is becoming an issue-based engagement. Like earlier, it used to be country to country or various countries coming together for having a security cooperation or whatever. It is becoming issue-based cooperation. Okay, on these issues, I'm cooperating with so and so countries. Okay, third thing, what is happening is a sort of network approach. What I say is, you may be part of many groupings. For example, India is part of many groupings. I'll cover subsequently in India's context. So it is becoming a complex equation in the sense, you may be part of 15 groups where your adversary may be also part of a group. So in one group, you are, at cross purposes with some of the members. So that is what is happening. Third thing, what is happening is, sort of selective agreement or disagreement. Like I say, issue based. On ABC, I agree with you. But DEF, I do not agree with you. So that sort of engagement is taking place. These are the trends which are taking place in the multilateral or even bilateral to lesser extent, but multilateral more extent. Then we talked about, if you remember in the beginning, we talked about a remark which are very, very flexible. The security cooperations are becoming flexible. I was doing this research. I had to give a talk on this subject, and I was doing some research. I couldn't find any very clearly defined definition of flexible security cooperation, but it had a lot of connotations. Okay, and when you see the connotations, it gives you a clearer picture how is the security cooperation becoming flexible. So one is, as I said, issue based and regional. Second is multiple groupings and ability to switch even those groups at times is what is happening in the new trends. Okay, third is although you may form a group with specific purpose, okay, specific issue in mind, but you always have a window open in the rules when you frame that any other new issue can be added on. So that becomes flexible sort of engagement. Then flexibility is also maintained in these groupings to adapt and change as per the prevailing situation and environment. That means your purpose may change itself, your structure may change itself, your rules may change itself, your working may change itself. So this is what is happening in the trends as far as this thing. Then also in some informal groups, you have the option of walking in, walking out. Like example is Quad. Not I'm not talking about the Quad now. The Quad which has evolved over the years between Quad 1 and 2. Australia and Malabar exercises. Australia has been coming in and out of Malabar exercises. Like it's sort of example of walk in, walk out sort of a concept. Okay, so flexible security cooperation reminds me of Indian roads. When you're going long distance anywhere, there are two lanes, but the chap ahead, he's going to drive in the center, occupying both lanes, and he'll swerve to the left, swerve to the right. Now you don't know whether to go from the right lane or from the left lane. He is keeping his options open. So it is like that. Flexibility, security, cooperation is like that. I mean, just on the lighter vein. So that is what is happening in the trends as far as multilateralism and security cooperation is concerned. Yeah, Adi.
Driving in the center lane is also a way of messaging, sir. I think, strategic messaging, if I may, use a very, very different term. But I agree with you, because there are certain countries who would get into a certain agreement at a certain time to send a message to its adversary that, listen, if you go this way, I can go that way. And there are times that issues do get sorted out with certain amount of strategic messaging. It's very interesting. It looks like a game of chess where opposite sides are just making moves around the place to gain a one-up in a particular situation at any given point of time.
Absolutely, absolutely.
India, of course, there's nothing in the open, but I'm sure the grouping in the Quad would have been pushed upon India to make it into an alliance, and that's something we've been averse in terms of joining an alliance. We've always said that we'll be non-aligned and we will work towards our own interests. And one of the biggest terms that is coming out right now is strategic autonomy. We will do business the way we like to do business. Having said that, we also see a flip side formation of the AUKUS, which is a hardcore military alliance, keeping India away from that entire thing. So that just gives you a message that India didn't want to kind of get inside a formal security alliance with the nations. Now, how does this thing work, and what are the advantages that India sees in front of itself by being in a position? And in the introduction, I also mentioned that India is, between Russia and USA, one of the few countries that has great relations with both the sides. It was also the case with Iran and Israel. We were buying oil and doing trade with Iran, and we had security cooperations with Israel as well. So how does this work for India, sir?
Yeah, you have thrown in quite a few questions and quite a few observations in this thing. Very interesting. So as far as Indian context is there, as I said, we are part of actually 80 odd groups.
Wow.
Okay, give or take. 80 odd groups. Some are formal, some are informal. Some are global, some are regional. Okay, some are issue based and some are general. Some are big, some are small. But 80 groups. But not a single military alliance. Okay, the closest, I know, we are like part of even BRICS, Quad, the SAARC, SCO, BIMSTEC, but no military alliance. The closest we came to military alliance historically is with the USSR during 1971 war, if you remember. But
security, it was not and friendship.
Yeah, it was not a military alliance as such, but it you can say close to it. Okay, now it was security cooperation is acceptable, but military alliance, due to some reason, India is averse to. Okay, why you also covered in your observation a term called strategic autonomy, correct? So we'll come to that. So why is India reluctant to go into military alliance? Like, one is, feeling is there that the strategic autonomy is lost. Okay, when you go into military alliance with other stronger nations. Second is domestic politics. That pressure comes in, that you are giving your strategic autonomy to the other, especially in a democracy, it becomes slightly difficult to handle domestically. Third is, burden sharing issues which come up. Okay, fourth is, divergent strategic considerations come in. As I said, now it is becoming issue based. Okay, for oil security, I'm with you. but for something else, I'm not with you. For water security, I'm not with you. So now you become cross purposes. Okay, even in Quad, the Quad, we are part of some groups which the other members are not. Other members are part of some group with China, but we are not. So that sort of divergent strategic considerations come in. So these are 3, 4 factors why India is reluctant to go into military alliance. Plus, we have burnt our fingers earlier also historically. So historically, if you remember, USA has been turning the tap on and off. If you see various during nuclear tests during 1971 war, they have been against us. They have put sanctions against us. Okay, USSR helped us a lot in 1971, but now they also gone commercial. Okay, it's not cheap anymore. And secondly, at the moment, their tilt is more towards China and Pakistan. The grouping which is forming in the Eastern Bloc is, China, Pakistan, and Russia. Okay, how long will it last is anybody's guess. There are no permanent enemies or permanent friends in the world order. That is also known. So, but at the moment, this reality is that. And what is India's guiding principle? Why do we this thing not going to military? Our foreign policy has always been based on non-alignment. Correct. We started with non-alignment, but world over now this non-alignment policy is changing into policy of maintaining equidistance. Although it sounds similar, but it has got a subtle difference between the two, and degree of difficulty both is equally important. So when we say equidistant, once again, it is issue based. Okay, and it is very relevant in the gray zone environment, gray zone conflict environment, which we have this thing. Why? Because in this gray zone environment, multilateral engagement or security cooperation or the multilateral security cooperation all is very, very important. We'll talk about it slightly later. But these are the reasons why India is not going into security alliance as such. But my personal take is that we should keep our mind open and not shut it close totally to it. If push comes to shove, we should get into military alliance. If that's my personal take, which people may agree, may not agree with it. And it is not so easier. It's easier said than done. It's not that you jump into military alliance overnight and expect things to happen. You have to work towards it. So diplomatically, I think, and militarily, we need to have our policies straight, and we need to work towards it so that our options remain open. As I said, flexibility, that flexible security environment, the flexibility part is maintained, and we don't get into rigid regime where we lose out on benefits of multilateralism or collective security. That is what my take is at the moment.
It's an interesting thing that you're putting across, so that it has to be issue based and interest based with an open mind. I mean, that's something that we see ourselves doing quite a bit, and as a matter of fact, trying to. I presume, I mean, and I hope that with continuing on this path, if things go straight, India should have the capacity of bringing two big things together to kind of bring down a situation of tension somewhere or the other. And that should be the mark point that we should find ourselves into. But having said that, I also agree with you that in a security scenario like we have with the Chinese today, in case we do need to get into an alliance to ensure that our interests are met, I think that's something that we should consider. And I'm sure the policy makers and the decision makers are obviously discussing about this. So coming to the last part of this, I think very interesting and eye-opening discussion. What would be your recommendations for tackling, we the challenges that we face today are because of the history that we have. So the current challenges and the future, where more and more challenges are going to come up in front of us as we grow larger and stronger in terms of our clout, there will be adversaries that will come in front of us. So what would be your recommendations?
So, very logical question as the topic is progressing. Uh, so, before I've been giving some recommendations while talking about various issues and aspects and challenges you talked about. At the moment, we are in a very difficult times. China is very belligerent and very aggressive, and we have two nuclear powered adversaries on both sides, and both are hand in glove with each other. So we are facing a collusive threat, and in a very, very aggressive way. And at the moment, it's a very delicate balance as far as our development is concerned and our military might is concerned. And third is the overlay of pandemic, which is affecting the entire world, all the countries, all the economies, and whether we can spend money on military at the moment to boost up our military might or not is again question. Even if we want to, we may not be able to. Correct. So that is the situation we are in. So we are in a caught at the moment between the devil and the beast, or whatever situation you can call it. So to my mind, so one of the main recommendation would be to start with, as I said earlier, keep our minds open to collective security. Okay, not be rigid. Don't shut ourselves. Okay, and before that, I would say that collective security and is very, very relevant, especially in the gray zone conflict. Even not only in wartime, even in peacetime. Why I'm saying that is because in peacetime you can share a lot of information with each other. You can in various domains, in cyber domain, in space domain, you can have int sharing, you can have info sharing, you can have a consolidated, or you can have a coordinated. You can use both the terms. Response to various gray zone situations. We had talked about gray zone earlier. Gray zone warfare is one where anything and everything can be used as a weapon. It's not related to military only. It could be economic. It could be anything. For example, also I remember I gave China used containers as a weapon during the trade war. So anything could be used as a weapon. So in these sort of gray zone situation, the collective security is very, very valid. Okay, not only in war, in peace also. So the third recommendation I would give is that defense diplomacy has got a lot of potential. Okay, in signaling, in posturing, in strategic coercion, in sending messages, and actually mitigating various gray zone situations. So we should use this defense diplomacy effectively. So that MEA, that is Ministry of External Affairs, and MOD, and the three services, we need to have synergized approach towards military diplomacy. Okay, so I'm not saying that we jump straight into military alliance with somebody, or we start using defense diplomacy straight away. What I'm saying is, you can have a sort of a escalation matrix. As I covered, defense diplomacy is exercised by 13, 14 examples I gave, the tools by which military diplomacy can be exercised, correct? So you can have a sort of escalatory matrix of exercises, exchanges, where it could, as required, on requirement basis, you could climb up the ladder or you could go down the ladder, and by various number of exercises or number of engagements or quality of engagements, have a combination of those, so that can be done. Then while doing all this, we need to have interoperability with our friendly military forces. Now, otherwise, if need comes to be, even if you go into alliance, you will not be able to effectively operate. So interoperability doesn't come overnight. As I mentioned earlier, interoperability comes by 2-3 means. Firstly, commonality of equipment. Okay. Second is common tactics and strategy and procedures. Okay. Then common language. You should be able to understand each other what you're saying. So this is how interoperability comes. And interoperability comes with engagement. You start with engagement in a HADR sort of situation, going into military exercises, multilateral exercises, different countries, not only bilateral, multi-service exercises, not only Air Force, Army, Navy exercising alone, all three combined could be. So that is how interoperability develops. So that we should continue improving our interoperability. Okay, I'll give you another exciting example. I talked about interoperability increasing by military hardware, correct? Indian Air Force keeps getting trolled at times that our inventory is very diverse. Okay, we got Russian equipment, we got Western equipment, we got Russia from America, we got from Israel, we got from France, and we got too much of diverse inventory, and it's a logistic nightmare. Correct? We get it keeps coming in the media very often, but in one way, it is blessing in disguise. Also, we have various taps available. And in difficult times, if one tap closes, at least we have other taps available. But if you're relying only on military alliance with one country or with one tap, then it becomes a problem in case, like if you're purely US equipment, majority of it, and US changes its stance and issues sanctions or something, then you're sunk. In the long run, obviously, self-reliance is the answer. You have to be self-reliant. But that was my punchline anyway. I've told it now itself. Uh, Diplomatically, also we need to have a balance between East and the West. Eastern Bloc as well as Western Bloc. Why I say this is Western Bloc. Obviously, at the moment, our adversary is in the Eastern Bloc, China and Pakistan. Correct. Western Bloc is also common enemies. Enemy is a friend. But historically, we had a bad example with USA, as I covered. So we cannot be totally reliant on the Western Bloc. Also, there is another aspect. It is said that 21st century is the century of ascendancy of Asia. The Westerners have ruled the world for very, very long. And now it is the turn of the Asian continent. That is what generally is also historians and analysts, they say. Now, keeping these two in mind, I think we need to have a balance between East and the West. Very easy when, all of us can say that, but it's a diplomatic nightmare. It's not an easy task. It's a very tightrope walk. How do you maintain this? Okay, it's very easy to analyst to say without any responsibility, but when you have to actually do it, how do you do it? It's a difficult task. Then we have to maintain balance with the third block also. Where countries like Israel, Middle East, other budding powers and all that. So that I'm calling it third block means they're not block as such, but we have to maintain balance between them. Then fourth most important thing, Aadi, is that we cannot afford to lose neighbors. Unfortunately, our performance in the department has not been so good. We have been losing neighbors to China, and China has been making inroads, increasing the interoperability. Neighbors also play card between this and that. If you don't give me this, I'll go to him.
Go there.
That sort of thing. But we need to be big brother, magnanimous in our approach. We cannot afford to lose neighbors. So that is the next part. Then, as I said, defense diplomacy has got a lot of potential. We need to use it effectively. The President of US, John F. Kennedy, had said that these two, that is the diplomacy and the defense diplomacy, are not substitute for one another. Okay, they're not a substitute for one another. They're either alone. If you use, they will fail. It has to be hand in glove, the diplomacy and the military. This thing. So that is what is required. Okay, then, as I said, gray zone warfare, multilateral engagement do help. So we need to go issue based with these countries, like-minded countries, and we can help who can help us. And we need to have a joint approach, this thing, in collective security. And while having collective security, we need to collectively, that means with the group, draw certain red lines. Okay, these are my red lines. Please don't cross this. Okay, if you cross this, the escalation will go up. Okay, collectively study enemies or the adversaries' fault lines. That is another this thing. Then collectively plug own gaps and collectively plan the responses so that the cost of any activity on the adversary increases. And this is more so relevant also in the present day environment of gray zone operations. And so these are some of the recommendations which I have to make use of multilateralism and make use of the collective security and military cooperation to deal with the situation which we are in at the moment. Aadi.
I'm so glad, sir, that you focused on gray zone operations more than conventional operations, because a conventional conflict is something that a lot of us don't see on the horizon in terms of a large open scale, full scale war. But the gray zone operations is something that we see around us in terms of even basic coercion and military coercion or diplomatic coercion that Chinese undertake within our neighborhood. And we've seen examples with Burma, we've seen examples with Sri Lanka, with Pakistan, of course, is a very clear example, and we've got our own issues there, Bangladesh, and so on and so forth. It's a very interesting subject when you put it like that, and it's actually brought in a lot of questions into my mind as to we've taken this path of being on our own and creating our own space within the world, but the to-do list that you've just put across is pretty long and it's very tough to look at it. I mean, I hope we do succeed in our endeavor. And but when somebody actually, as a layman, when he looks at it, he says, "यार क्यों ना alliance में घुस के ये सब खत्म करो? Any attack on me is an attack on the other person." But the advantages that you also put across to us with regards to what we can do and create a balance amongst ourselves and be a part of multiple groupings and have our national interests right at the forefront is also one of the biggest things that I take away from what you've spoken. Sir, this has been an enlightening discussion, because at the end of it, a lot of discussion on this particular front is happening. I watch a lot of Pakistani media, and they talk about this quite a bit, that how is India managing its relationships with adversaries and able to actually squeeze out what it wants from two countries that are literally at loggerheads. For example, the Americans and Russians today are at loggerheads with regards to Ukraine, but we have cooperations with both of them, and that's something which is being brought out. Sadly, in the Indian media, people don't talk about all this stuff. Yes, it's a little crass when you listen to the Pakistani media, but they do analyze these things, and it's interesting to hear it from them when we the activities that we conduct, and we see that happening there. So once again, thanks so much. It's always a very, very, enlightening discussion with you, because we discuss something which is far beyond the normal realms of discussion. We've talked about the roles of the Air Force. We've talked about the gray zones in the in air power use in the gray zone. As a matter of fact, one of the best interviews which is doing really well online is, will India actually buy more Rafales? And we spoke about a lot of different things in that. So once again, sir, thank you so much for joining me in spite of your busy personal schedule, your talks, and your travel and everything. Till next time, sir. Jai Hind.
Thank you, Aadi. Thanks a lot. Jai Hind.